Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm thrilled to have with us our guest author, Nancy West, whose latest book, Agatha Christie, The Mother of the Cozy Mystery, is just out in bookstores like the Poison Pen. We do have copies available for purchase. If you'd like for us to hold one for you or put one in the mail, just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen Bookstore. Now I'd like to welcome Nancy West.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. I definitely want to get into your new book, which is fabulous, whether you're a Christie fan or not. There's a lot to talk about. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who is Nancy?
Okay, I'll give you the abbreviated version.
Okay.
I am a professor of English at the University of Missouri in Columbia, so it's the flagship institution. I've been there since 1995. And what got me into Christie is that we offer in the English department a very, very large lecture class that is meant to teach a variety of students, engineers, biology students, and it's called Reading Literature. And I thought, what topic can I do that will appeal broadly? And so I came up with mystery fiction. And I have to say, the class has kind of been a huge hit because of the readings. And so I put Agatha Christie on the syllabus every year, and she's always ranked as one of the top two or three favorite writers of the course. Mhm.
How did this particular book project come about? Was it something you wanted to do? Did the publisher come to you and say, would you work on this? What's the
Um,
origin?
I have a friend, a colleague, who had just finished one on Jane Austen
Uh,
and had a lot of fun doing it because it's a real challenge what this
uh,
book sort of requires. And I think she was talking to the press, which is Simon and Schuster, and my name came up as a possibility to do one as well. And when they approached me, I said Agatha Christie would be a great choice for lots of reasons. So we went with that one.
and if I understand correctly, you were kind of on a fast track to get this book written.
Yeah, I had a little less than 6 months, and
Well,
when the contract came in the mail, I just about fell over.
mhm.
But I had no time really to just read and research. So from day one, I was writing, and the book is structured. It's going to sound crazy, but as a hundred vignettes. And
Mhm.
every vignette is just a few pages long. So I wrote almost from day one and kind of got into a rhythm where I would write as much as I wanted, putting in as much relevant or interesting information for that particular topic as I thought was important. And then the next day, I would revise it and cut. And I would do the revising and cutting in the morning, which is the more difficult work. And then I would draft the next entry in the afternoons. And then in between that, I read biographies, her autobiography, encyclopedias, criticism, and I watched or rewatched the adaptations at nighttime. Yeah.
What did you find to be the most useful resources when you were writing about her? Were there particular books? I know there's an Agatha Christie Society, her family, there's still family members alive.
Mhm. If I had had years
Mm.
to do this book, I would have tried to talk to the family and gone to Devon and gone to the Agatha Christie Institute and done archival research.
Oh.
But that time, I didn't have that time. And I'm thinking now of writing a bigger biography of her, perhaps. But what I relied on were there are four excellent biographies of Christie out there. There's her autobiography, which is fascinating, although somewhat unreliable because she's terrible with dates and a little loose with facts. So I had to take some of it with a grain of salt and then check against other sources. Um, uh, a book came out a few years ago by Bloomsbury, which is really one of the first major books of criticism on her. And I found that tremendously useful. So there's some great resources out there that were sort of right at my fingertips.
That Bloomsbury book, actually, Mary Ann Evans is one of the
Yes.
contributors to that. She wrote several mysteries for Barbara Peters' Poison Pen Press.
Oh,
So
that's right.
yeah,
I
she talked a little bit
remember
about that
that.
book. Yeah, she's
Yes,
a
she
big
did.
Christie scholar too. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I think one of the things that I enjoyed about your book, one of the points that came across to me as a reader, is that how we perceive Agatha Christie as a reader, as ourselves, is shaped by how we enter her world, whether it's through her novels, whether it's through adaptation, cinematic or television, because they're not all the same Christies.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the question is. Are you
Um,
asking?
well, can you talk a little bit about, like, in the case of Hercule Poirot, if you read about him in the books, you get an idea of who he is. But if you
Mhm.
watch David Suchet, there's a
Mhm.
slightly different take on him.
Yeah. So one of the miracles of reading Agatha Christie is this sense that we get of character, even though she gives us very little description of her characters.
Yeah.
We also get a strong sense of atmosphere, although she gives us very little description of place. She herself got very tired of Poirot pretty early on and called him, and this is, I think, an exact quote, a bombastic, um, tiresome, tiresome, and irritable little creature. Why did I ever invent this person? Um, and people have said, and sort of justifiably so, that there are some novels in which he comes across as rather cartoonish, almost. The adaptations done starring David Suchet are so good. And the darker ones, the ones from season 10 to the end, season 13, are longer. They're film length, and they have incredible casts. And at this point, Suchet really brings a much more complex portrayal to Poirot. And he gets backstories, he gets more depth. In later life, he's haunted by the crimes that he solved and the decisions in some cases that he's made to let people get off and walk, as in the case of Murder on the Orient Express. Yeah. So I think that series did a wonderful job of deepening his character for us. And now it's so hard to tell, where the Perot is, right? Is it on the page or is it on the screen? And the answer is it's in our heads, right? And in our heads, it's both. Yeah.
And there's been many different adaptations, both of Poirot and Marple, and there's been Agatha Christie herself had some issues with the way some of them were
Mhm.
portrayed in her view, that not closely enough to her own vision of her character.
Yeah.
Did she really, were there ones that I think I know which the answer is, but were there ones that rang true to her and ones that she really said, no, this is not my vision?
Oh, she sure did. She's kind of a nightmare when it comes to adaptation. I
Mhm,
teach courses on adaptation, and my view is, a story only stays alive if people change it, right?
mhm,
And Arthur Conan Doyle, to use a comparison, didn't care what people did with the character of Sherlock Holmes. Someone approached him, a playwright, and said, I want to give him a romantic interest. And Doyle said, Go ahead, do whatever you like with him. But she couldn't let go. So
mhm.
in 1928, they did a theatrical adaptation of the murder of Roger Ackroyd called Alibi, starring the great Charles Lawton. He was only 28 at the time. And she hated it because she said he's all wrong for the part of Poirot. He doesn't look the part, he doesn't act the part, he doesn't have his same gestures or um, And then, more famously, there were a series of four MGM films made in the 1960s. They're comedies, they're hilarious,
Mhm.
starring a comedian named Margaret Rutherford, who was delightful, I think, as Miss
Mhm.
Marple, but totally unlike what we get in the books, right?
Mhm.
So the thing about Miss Marple is she's passive. She's an observer who sits and knits and watches. What a challenge to bring that to the screen, right?
Mhm.
So I think these people in 1961 through 19 mid 60s thought, we got to get her moving. And so they put her on a horse. They dress her
Mhm.
up in a maid's costume. She has to
Yeah.
sneak around looking for clues. She does the twist in one of them. Oh, and it just, I mean, I laugh, but it broke Agatha Christie's heart. And I think here's my theory about that. I think what they did was they made a joke in her mind of Miss Marple, and in
Mhm.
so doing, made a joke out of her. And
Oh.
people were already doing this. I mean,
Mhm.
she's still hugely popular in the 1960s, Agatha
Mhm.
Christie.
Mhm.
But, this is the era of writers like Martin Kingsley Amis and,
Mhm.
the angry young men.
Mhm.
Patricia Highsmith is doing a totally different kind of crime writing. And what is she seen as? This little old lady who's outdated and old-fashioned. And
Mhm.
so I think it really hurt her because it cut close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very perceptive comment on that. I never really thought about that from her viewpoint, Agatha Christie's. One of the other things your book does, quite nicely within the confines of what you were working with, is there's the perception that Agatha Christie, this monolithic idea of Agatha Christie, the author, but you show Agatha Christie in many different
Mm,
personas. The
mhm.
playwright, the mother, the wife, the archaeologist helper. Talk a little bit about the many different faces of Agatha Christie.
Yeah, that was one of the things I loved about researching the book was just, she had the art of living. She knew how to live well. She was full of energy, saw life as a gift. And so it wasn't until her early 60s that she really blossomed as a playwright. And went on, with doing plays throughout the 60s and 70s. Only female playwright to have three plays um, running simultaneously in the West End, two in the 1950s. Um, so, and as somebody who just turned 62, she was a wonderful person for me to discover in this way. And I think really sort of led her best life when she was in her 50s and in her 60s. She had a very sad first marriage, or at least the ending of it was sad. Her second marriage was much happier in many ways and more comfortable. And she was also married to somebody, interestingly, who was 14 years her junior. But he was an archaeologist who took her, to many places in the Middle East that she probably wouldn't have gone to otherwise. And she worked as an archaeologist. She cleaned the fossils and categorized them. She taught herself photography. She learned how to do darkroom photography. She was really there in the fields with men, and they respected her. Uh, her role as a mother, I think, is tricky. She even admitted at various points that she never quite felt like a mother. And people have theorized that in some ways it's because she never let go of feeling like a child. Her happiest time, maybe other than her 50 and 60s, was when she was a child. And she was beloved by her parents. And I think, in a sense, never kind of grew up. She retained that childlike capacity for wonder, but she also wanted to be taken care of. And her second husband really did that for her, even though he was much younger. But I think in some ways, mm, she felt almost fraudulent, perhaps, as a mother. And she often saw Rosalind as she described her as a strange plant that she was sort of in charge of taking care of. So they had a pretty strained relationship. Yeah. Which interestingly, she doesn't talk about in her autobiography at all. Yeah.
Yeah, she was a very guarded person. She really did not reveal. She didn't do a lot of interviews. She didn't do a lot of talking about herself. She was very much a private person. And one of the things that a lot of people didn't realize was she had an ultra literary ego, Mary Westmacott, and that came a little bit later that we discovered. How does that show a reflection of her personality, the Westmacott books?
That's a great question. So the first one comes out in 1930, and it's 4 years after what was the darkest year of her life. 1926. She's been married 12 years. She has a 9-year-old daughter. Her husband comes home one day and he says, "I don't love you anymore. I'm in love with somebody else named Nancy, by the way. Um, and I want a divorce and I want to marry her. And it devastates her. And then, of course, as I can talk about later if you want or not, she disappears as a consequence. But this was a very dark time for her. And she's happy in 1930. She has met her new husband. She's gotten married. But I think the books became a kind of depository for her to explore that year, the emotions, the aftermath of it. And she wrote them up until 1956. There's six altogether, but she was outed in 1949 by the Atticus column, a gossip column in the Sunday Times. They exposed her. Yeah. And it was really too bad because I do think she was, as you say, a very private person. And this anonymity that the pseudonym Mary Westmacott gave her allowed her to write whatever she wanted. And some of those novels are really close to her life, startlingly close. Um,
It's interesting because in some ways you think about other authors like J.K. Rowling, who writes as Galbraith and then is discovered to be J.K. Rowling, and she doesn't have that luxury of being a different person, of not letting her real person out.
yeah.
Talk a little bit about the famous disappearance because it's been the subject of at least two movies, to my understanding, and several books. And there's always the question, was it something that really did happen, or was it something hatched as a plot?
Right. Yeah. So the 100th anniversary of that appearance is coming up. It was on December 3rd, 1926. And at this point, she knows about her husband's affair. He calls that night and tells her he's staying with friends, and she knows that his mistress is with them. So she gets in her car at about 9 o'clock at night and spends the whole night driving around, circles the home where the friends are multiple times, torturing herself the way we do when we're desperately in love with somebody who no longer loves us.
Mhm.
And about 6 o'clock in the morning, the car stalls. She gets out. This is December. It's cold, it's dark. She walks around in a kind of dream state. A local farmer helps her, starts her car for her, and he wants to give her more help because she's so obviously in distress. But she kind of runs away, gets in the car, and runs it down a steep hill toward a quarry. The intention, I think, being to kill herself. And she admits as much in her autobiography, which is kind of surprising. The car is stopped by a row of hedges, so she's saved. And then she goes to London, spends the afternoon there, and then heads off to a spa in Yorkshire and is there for 11 days. There's a national manhunt going on for her all this while. And so some theories are the official line about it is that she had amnesia. And this is what Archie Christie, her first husband, said to save face, essentially. I don't believe that. The week before she left, she had shipped a diamond ring. And when she was in London for those few hours before she got to the spa in Yorkshire, she brought the ring into Harrods department store and said, please repair it and send it up to the spa. How could she do that if she no longer knew who she was? It doesn't make sense. Some people get fancy and say that she had what was called a dissociative fugue, which is amnesia plus a desire to flee. But since I don't believe in the amnesia, I don't believe in this. I think what happened really was that she got in the car just wanting to forget who she was, wanting to leave her old life behind, and maybe wanting to die, and then realized, in fact, that she didn't want to die. She wrote a note to her brother-in-law, Campbell Christie, when she was in London for those few hours, saying that she was up at a spa in Yorkshire, though she didn't tell him which one. But I think she finally did, she decided she wanted to be found, right? But she also thought, well, maybe if Archie is distraught enough, he'll realize how much he loves me. And then she opens up the papers and sees all about the manhunt, and the manhunt's going on. And every day the search is getting bigger and more serious. They're draining bodies of water, you know. And I think because she was so shy and so private, she did what a lot of people would do, maybe me. She just froze and hid and became passive about it and said, let them find me. That's my theory. Now, I'd like to give her more agency than that, but I
Mhm.
really, I don't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and you have to put it in the context of her times too, because what someone would do today
Yeah.
is very different from what someone would do 80 years ago or something like
Right.
that. The
And
option.
I forgot to mention that the press was, they just attacked her for this because her husband, he was getting suspicion thrown at him that he was the murderer. And so he's being interviewed and he's getting nervous. He's feeling trapped. And he says maybe it had something to do, this disappearance, with one of her mysteries. She was very, very clever. That's all the media needed. And they ran with that angle. And so the press is thinking, or making a lot of the fact that all this manpower, all these resources are being spent on this one woman. And it's a publicity stunt. She never would have done that either. She was way too private for that. Yeah.
One of the other interesting angles we get into Agatha Christie is her professional relationship with other writers. And I think it was the Detection Club that she was a
Mhm.
member of.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, she is a very private person, but yet she had really good professional relationships.
Mhm. Yeah, she did. I love that club, made up of, I think it started with 28 mystery writers and then burgeoned over time. Um, and it had its dark, mysterious rituals, to be initiated. It took place in London. So she did have this real sense of community with other writers. And I think she enjoyed going. I don't think she was a particularly clubbable person, though, because she was shy.
Mhm,
And she was asked to be president of it when Dorothy Sayers died, unfortunately, too
mhm,
early. And she said, okay, I'll do it, but I never want to give a speech. So
mhm,
she co-presidented
mhm,
it. Um, uh, and there were a few publications in which
mhm.
she collaborated, did a sort of serial publication for the radio. But I don't think she particularly enjoyed that. She went along with it, she was a sport about it, but I think she was a very solitary writer in the end. Yeah.
Another insight we get into Agatha Christie is a lot of writers, for them, it's the creative process. That's what they love, creating the books, communing with characters, all that. But it's also, there's a business side to it. And
Mhm.
especially later in her life, that really became an issue because Great Britain had, I never really understood it, but I guess the tax laws were horrific for authors, and she had to figure out how to create something that would keep her, the business side, the professional side, safe too.
Yeah, and she had a terrible head for money, really.
Yeah.
But she was actually very mathematically gifted, but she had no interest really in finances. So yeah, I mean, you've heard of the Rolling Stones and who was David Bowie, Richard Burton, all these people who left the country for a while to live somewhere else because taxes were so high, especially after the war when they're trying to repair the welfare state.
Mhm.
So I know that by 1960, um, if you made more than 15,000 pounds, about 90% of that for Agatha Christie was being taxed. And it was the same thing for Daphne Maurier, another mystery
Oh.
writer who claimed that, I think this is far back as the 1920s, she was being taxed 90% as well on her. I think she had made 25,000 pounds that year. 22,000 of it, which is 90%,
Mhm.
went to the government. So all her money is going to the British government. And then America steps in, right? And so for years, she had been what was called a non-resident alien author, which meant that she didn't have to pay taxes on the sales that she made in the United States. And then there was a very famous case called the Sabatini case, Englishman who wrote these historical epics.
Mhm.
And the Supreme Court decided that, in fact, he did need to pay
Mhm.
tax to the IRS on his sales. And so she had a lot of money then to pay back to the IRS for previous sales. And so her agent, Edmund Cork, is pulling his hair out. Her American agent is pulling his hair out. And they finally come up in the 1950s with this idea of the Agatha Christie Trust. And so then, things get saner for her. But she owed so much money that she was desperately sort of writing up until she died, right? Just so that she could pay things back. Yeah.
And that kind of builds into my next question, if you can kind of explore that, is that trust setting up kind of her as a brand, as a business. There's even today, there's real efforts to maintain that. I mean, there's copyright issues with characters and things like that. How do you continue to keep her literary legacy alive now that she's gone?
hmm that's a great question. And I think Rosalind, and that to me is so psychologically interesting.
Mhm.
They did have a strained relationship, but she became this kind of lioness, even while her mother was alive, about her mother's work. Extremely protective and watchful. So people were asking forever to write biographies of Agatha Christie. She turned them down, she turned them down, and finally granted the first one to Janet Morgan in 1984. At one point, Agatha Christie was nicknamed Adamant Agatha because her estate kept turning down studios who wanted to adapt
Wow.
her stories. Um, and then I think once Rosalind was gone, and her husband was gone, her grandson has been much more flexible and has really sort of opened the possibilities up. And now they're doing the first Miss Marple novel
Yes.
by Lucy Foley that's coming
Mhm.
out in September, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah, and so I sort of see this, I call it peak Agatha, that she's kind of our decade's Jane Austen, right?
oh.
And people are spinning her in all sorts of ways. She's being Gen Z'd.
Mhm.
The stories are really changing pretty drastically.
Yeah, there's a new adaptation of a young Hercule Poirot
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
in the works, I believe, too.
A
I-
young, hot new Perot. I've seen the photos. My husband, who's very fuddy-duddy-ish about this, and you'll be watching that by yourself.
That's so funny. It is a challenge as a reader. I mean, on the one hand, what would Agatha think about her characters being picked up by other writers? I have the impression she wouldn't be terribly thrilled. But as a reader, it's like the chance to read something else that's even close to what she was writing. You kind of think, okay, maybe I'll take a chance on it.
Yeah, yeah. And I have problems, a lot of problems with the Sarah Phelps adaptations that were
Hmm.
produced in the 2015s and so on, because they're so relentlessly dark. And I do find Agatha Christie darker than a lot of people
Hmm.
assume. But these seem too much so. But the Sarah Phelps adaptation of And Then There Were None
Yes. Hmm.
gets the existential bleakness of that novel, its inexorability, its cruel, cruel tone, absolutely right. And you think, this is what film can do. It's a multi-track medium who has all these things at its disposal, and it just brings that book alive. My son never reads, and he loved that adaptation, and so then went and read the Agatha Christie
Hmm.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Some of them, it was hit or miss, but her first one was definitely very much in the right spirit of the book. Um, what do you think? What is your perception, your idea? What do you think critics miss about Agatha Christie? What are they not getting about her? And there have been very savage critics of her work.
What did they miss in terms
What do
of
they miss in
what?
terms of why so many other people love her? They're not seeing that.
Mhm. Well, I think one way of answering that question, right, is to say that all she does is what Francis Wyndham famously called animated algebra, that
Yeah,
all we have are the puzzles.
yeah.
Yeah, and the puzzles are amazing.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't discount just how brilliant a writer it takes to do those sorts of plots over and over and over again. I read every single 66 of these detective novels, and I was just amazed by the brain power it takes to fool me every time. She has certain strategies, I think, that are almost hypnotic in the way that they work, that allow my brain to sort of give up or tire,
Hmm.
um, and then just be fooled at the end. You know, but I do think, having said all that, um, I'll answer this very
Hmm.
specifically. I think she was more literary than a lot of people give her credit for. Death on
Hmm.
the Nile is one of her best novels. I see it without a doubt as a rewriting of Henry James's The Wings of the Dove, which is about two
Oh.
lovers who want to marry and can't because they don't have enough money. What
Hmm.
is Death on the Nile about? Two lovers who want to marry and can't because they don't have enough money. Henry James does the plot so that the man seduces the girl's best friend, who conveniently is dying of a disease.
Hmm.
Agatha Christie has them kill her off, right? But the novel, if you read it alongside Henry James, you realize that Agatha Christie is not just giving us a mystery, she's giving us a book about the destructive powers of love, right? What love can do to otherwise maybe decent people, right? And so I think that, she was a voracious reader. I can see so many references and allusions to other works in her books. There's that. But I also think she had this sort of genius for creating atmosphere without giving us a lot of description. I mean, that's kind of a miracle. How do you do that as a writer, right? Giving us character without a lot of description. And I just had this conversation with somebody else that said, what actually makes up a good writer in the end, right? Is it somebody like Henry James who does have layers and layers of complexity? Or is it somebody like Agatha Christie who seems so, in a sense, the novels are almost like fairy tales. They're so simple, but they keep us reading and we're so invested and we remember those people. It's brilliant. Yeah. I
That's
think
so
they're missing
wonderful.
that.
What a wonderful summation. I think you're right. I'll steal from someone else who was referencing her gift for characterization. Critics say they're cardboard characters, that she doesn't write fully fleshed people. But I think in some cases her intent was just to give you enough detail that as you're reading, you think, okay, this is the typical ex-military man, blah, blah, blah. And then she twists that, and
That's
there's
right.
something that is not right about that. So you're caught off guard.
Yes, yeah. Working with our own presuppositions and
Mm.
prejudices. And that's brilliant. That's wonderful. Yeah. And then subverting them. Yeah.
What did you discover about Agatha Christie while you were doing research on this book that surprised you the most?
Well, one of the things, was that she was a surfer. Who knew? And on, on my screensaver, I have an image of her as the Agatha Christie we know, the dowager-looking garden club president on a surfboard. But she went on this world tour in 1922, and as a very athletic woman in her early years, fell in love with surfing and became the first British woman on record to stand on a surfboard. Yeah. So
Wow.
that was really surprising to me. Yeah. Um,
In
uh,
addition to Agatha Christie, your new book, you've written on a lot of other topics. You have a book that I found fascinating on PBS, and that your first introduction to the world of mystery?
I would say it wasn't, well, I guess it was because I had a immigrant mother. She was from Germany and she was a relentless self-improver. So I'm an only child. It was just my mom and me. And she made me watch Masterpiece Theater every Sunday night with her. But as a child, like they were pretty hard.
Yeah.
But then I got older and then I just became addicted to them. So I would say that, the ones that go back even further are the 1970s and the 1980s when Mystery as a PBS show comes on. Yeah, that's where I really discovered mystery writers, including Agatha Christie. Now it was PBS. No.
Even today, you're writing on current cinematic or theatrical or movie or television productions like The Crown and Downton Abbey. Is that a special interest for you? These kind of British big budget?
Yeah, it is. I teach historical fiction quite
Yeah.
often. I'm fascinated by it, and then I love how it gets translated into period drama, right? And the choices that go into the details, the level of, I mean, Downton Abbey. It wasn't just a television show. It created a world. It was as
Mhm.
world building as Star Wars was in a
Yeah.
way, right? Um, so that fascinates me, but also the choices that writers have to make, historical fiction, right? How do you do
Mhm.
history and how do you tell a good story? And the emphasis always has to be on fiction, right? But at the same time, you want to respect history too. And I think the tension between those two is just fascinating to me. Yeah. So when I retire in
Mhm.
2 more years, I'm
Mhm.
going to try my own hand at historical novels, and they're going to be
Yeah,
mystery novels. Yeah, I
that's
can't wait.
wonderful.
Hmm.
Yeah. Gosh, that's such an interesting idea. I completely forgot what I was going to say next, but let's see. Oh, I was going to ask what's next from you as an author, but you've covered that, so we can look forward to that perhaps in the future.
I hope so. Yeah. In the meantime, I'm finishing now. It's a memoir. Has nothing well, it does actually. It's a memoir about my father and me. He was estranged from my mother. Uh, but on weekends, he would pick me up and we would go to New York and we'd spend the days watching movies at art house cinemas and in first run theaters. So, in an age when movie theaters are now dying, I saw this as kind of an important book to be writing. But my father was also a con artist and a thief.
Oh,
So maybe if you ask about my interest in crime, It actually goes much far back than Masterpiece Theater.
That's interesting. Um, I do have a question. I'm not sure it's something you can answer, but a lot of times the Poison Pen is talking to authors of novels, and there's a way of writing fiction, and there's also a way of writing nonfiction. They're not always the same. They don't draw upon the same skill sets. They're not always, there's some overlap, of course, but what is it like writing nonfiction books? What are the challenges?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've spent my whole life writing scholarly work and then, recently moved into more journalistic work. So
Mm,
this was my first foray into creative writing. And one of the things I had to learn was translating or thinking about myself and my parents as characters, right?
mm,
Giving them, making them visible on the page and alive on the page, and, going inside my consciousness as a child, which was, it's tough to write from a perspective of a 9-year-old, right?
mm,
And then going inside the consciousness of a man that I actually didn't know very well at all, right? And so you have to fictionalize. So I found that, I think, perhaps the
mm,
most interesting part of writing creative nonfiction is taking real people and
mm,
then translating them into characters. Yeah. And then figuring out, creative nonfiction operates on a continuum. Here's truth, here's fiction. You can
mm,
be anywhere you want on that continuum, but you have to let your readers know, right?
mm,
And you have to write in a way that is commensurate with that point on the continuum, too.
mm,
And that's fascinating, right?
mm,
How much do I want to fictionalize here? How much do I need to fictionalize simply because I can't remember? And how do I make that clear to my readers
mm.
and keep them along? Yeah.
We're almost out of time, but could you, or would you like to tell us your own favorite Agatha Christie work?
That's such a great question. Um, well, I can't give you one because there's
Okay.
66 of them
Yeah.
altogether. But I'll give you a couple really quickly. Bertram's Hotel, at
Mm,
Bertram's Hotel, which is a late Miss Marple novel. Um, I love it because so much of it is about memory and about aging. And it's where it was written at a time when Miss Marple and Agatha Christie are converging. They're about the same age. And so Miss Marple, she's looking back on her life. She's at this hotel that she used to visit when she was a little girl. And she's going back after all these years. And her memories are actually Agatha Christie's memories.
mm,
And so Miss Marple becomes a kind of conduit for Agatha Christie to the past. So it's this deeply personal book that's just a beautiful meditation on mortality, on memory. It's one of my favorites. And then another one for totally different reasons. In the spy series that Agatha Christie wrote, the Tommy and
and
Tuppence
Tuppence.
Beresford thrillers, I don't like most of them all that much, but there's one set during World War II, and
Mhm,
it was written during World War II called NRM,
mhm,
and I think that's great.
mhm,
She tends to write those thrillers in a much more lively style, a more playful style than
mhm,
the mysteries themselves. And but you also at the same time get the sense of
mhm,
what war was like living in London during
mhm.
that time. Yeah. So I'd recommend those two.
Those are terrific. They did an excellent adaptation of
Hmm.
NRM with I can't think of the actor, but it was recently on.
Hmm.
We've been very fortunate to have with us at the Poison Pen today author Nancy West, whose new book out is Agatha Christie, the Mother of the Cozy Mystery. It's truly a wonderful introduction to her. If you've never read her, if you love her and have read her for years like I have, it's just a joy to read what Nancy has written about her and get new ideas, new thoughts about her. And you brought some wonderfully perceptive insights today. I'd like to thank you, Nancy, for joining us.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. It was my pleasure.
And thank everyone else for tuning in to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore.